I was standing on a rooftop in the Chilean desert at 3 in the morning, and the sky was doing what the sky only does in places this far from human light, performing itself, fully, without apology. The Milky Way wasn't a smear or a suggestion. It was a structure, a dense, three-dimensional architecture of light stretching from one horizon to the other, and standing underneath it I had the specific physical sensation. Not a thought, a sensation, something felt in the body before it reaches the brain, of being attached to it, of being part of it, of the distinction between the sky above me and the ground beneath me being, at some sufficiently large scale, essentially meaningless. I had driven 3 hours from the nearest town to stand here. I do this sometimes, between jumps, when the accumulated weight of witnessed history needs somewhere to go. You stand under enough sky and the weight redistributes. The darkness absorbs it. I had my notebook open. I had been trying, for 40 minutes, to write something about entropy, about the second law of thermodynamics, that law which states, with the flat, patient authority of mathematics, that the total disorder of a closed system always increases over time, that heat moves from hot to cold and never reverses, that every fire that burns brings the universe fractionally closer to a state of perfect, total, irreversible equilibrium, that the stars above me, every single one of them, from the blue supergiants burning themselves out in millions of years to the red dwarfs that will last for trillions, are all, without exception, losing, spending themselves, converting their mass into energy and their energy into light and their light into the expanding darkness, and that this process, begun 14 billion years ago in a single incomprehensible instant, moves in only one direction and terminates in only one place. The end of everything. I had read the cosmological projections. I knew the numbers, not as abstractions but as distances I had learned to take seriously after years of jumping across centuries as casually as most people cross time zones. 10 to the power of 14 years from now, the last stars will exhaust their fuel. 10 to the power of 40, the last stellar remnants will decay. 10 to the power of 67, the last black holes will finish evaporating in a final whisper of Hawking radiation. And after that, after a number so large it makes the current age of the universe look like the first millisecond of the first day, a state of perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. No temperature gradients, no usable energy, no movement, no information processing of any kind. A universe that has, in the most complete and literal sense possible, run down. I looked up at the Milky Way. I looked down at my watch. The face was already active, glowing a color I had never seen it produce before. Not green or gold or red. Something between deep violet and the specific blue-black of the sky directly overhead. A color that seemed to belong to the watch the way darkness belongs to space. Not as an absence but as a presence, a thing in itself. The watch had never chosen a destination this far before. I wasn't certain it could survive the jump. I wasn't certain I could survive the jump. I pressed the crown anyway. What happened next did not resemble any previous transition. Every jump I have ever made has involved a sensory replacement, the auction house becoming the Silk Road, the seminar room becoming Da Vinci's workshop, the Manchester platform becoming the Rainhill field. One set of physical inputs dissolving and another set arriving to take its place. The transition between them lasts approximately 2 seconds and involves a specific quality of disorientation I have come to recognize as the texture of moving through time. A brief, total suspension of all sensory data followed by the sudden reinstatement of a different world. This was not that. This took a long time. I don't know how long because my watch stopped functioning as a timepiece somewhere in the middle of it. What I experienced in the interval was not darkness exactly. Darkness implies the absence of light, and what I moved through was the absence of something more fundamental than light. The absence of difference, of gradient, of the basic physical precondition for anything to happen at all. I moved through it the way a thought moves through a mind that is almost asleep, present but barely, and aware of its own tenuous grip on coherence. And then I arrived. I used that word loosely. There was no ground beneath me. There was no above or below. Those directions require a gravitational source, and there were none. There was no temperature in any sense I could register on my skin, because temperature requires a difference between two regions of space, and there were none of those either. There was, in every direction I could perceive, an absolute and total sameness that my visual system processed as darkness, but that was categorically different from the darkness of the Chilean desert. That darkness had been full of light from distant sources, full of the movement of photons crossing billions of light years to reach my retinas, full of the implicit presence of a universe in vigorous, burning operation. This darkness was empty in a way that the word empty was not designed to carry. It was the darkness of a room that has never contained anything and never will. I floated in it, breathed. The fact that I could breathe, that the life support systems woven into the chronal watch's field were still functioning, still maintaining a thin envelope of survivable conditions around my body, was the only evidence I had that I still existed in any meaningful physical sense. I waited, and then I saw it. Far away. Distance had no reliable meaning here, but it registered as far, a dim, dark red object. Not bright, not the vivid crimson of a young red giant. This was the color of an ember 30 seconds after the fire has gone out, the absolute last expression of heat before it becomes indistinguishable from the surrounding cold. A red dwarf star in its final phase, radiating the last of its thermal energy into a universe that was no longer significantly cooler than its own surface. It was not burning anymore in any meaningful sense. It was equalizing, spending the last of its differential, the last temperature gradient between its core and the space around it, in a slow, final, almost meditative release of infrared light that no eye in the universe remained alive to see. Except mine. I watched it for what felt like a long time. I know that time perception in a sensory deprivation environment is unreliable. But I watched it until the dim red glow had dimmed further, shifted toward infrared, passed below the threshold of visible light entirely. And then it was gone. Not dramatically. Not with the explosive violence of a supernova or the slow theatrical expansion of a red giant swallowing its planets. It simply became indistinguishable from everything around it. The last temperature gradient in my field of view reached equilibrium, and the darkness became uniform, and the universe, the actual universe, the entire 14 billion year project of matter and energy organizing itself into stars and galaxies and planets and oceans and cells and minds and languages and cities and music and science and every form of beauty and suffering the human species has ever produced or experienced, became, in that moment, completely and permanently still. I hung in that stillness. And I want to tell you what I felt, because this is the part that surprised me. The part one did not expect and could not have predicted from any amount of reading about entropy and cosmology and the thermodynamic fate of closed systems. I had expected to feel despair. The category of response that the intellectual understanding of universal heat death tends to produce. A cold, vertiginous horror at the meaninglessness of existence in the face of inevitable total extinction. The nihilism of deep time. I had prepared myself for that. I had thought I was ready for it. What I felt instead was gratitude. Specific, overwhelming, almost painful gratitude. Not for anything in particular. For all of it. For the fact that the stars had burned at all. For the 14 billion years of extraordinary physical improbability that had produced, among everything else it produced, a species capable of standing under a night sky and feeling attached to it. For the specific, unrepeatable accident of my own existence in the specific, unrepeatable window of cosmic time when the universe was still young enough and energetic enough and differentiated enough to permit the existence of things like thought and feeling and memory and the desire to know what comes next. The universe was not tragic. It had been magnificent. It had burned with a magnificence so total and so sustained that no adequate record of it could exist, because any record requires a system complex enough to store information, and complexity requires energy, and energy requires difference, and difference was exactly what the universe had spent 14 billion years slowly, beautifully, irreversibly consuming. It had burned itself out in the act of being everything it was. I found that, in the end, I could not call that a loss. My watch vibrated against my wrist. Not the low battery buzz I knew, but something I had never felt before. A single long pulse that I interpreted as urgency. The field maintaining my survivable envelope was destabilizing. There was nothing